It looks like we are ready to go. And hopefully you all are able to see the transcripts and everything on the bottom. Okay, now let's get started. Thank you all so much for joining. So on-camera interviews and how to do them effectively. So first, I usually like to ask the presenters and the attendees what you want to know. You are more than welcome to drop some of those questions just into the chat. So what your experience level is with interviews, if you have any particular questions around how to do on-camera interviews or what you find intimidating or scary or odd about them. So I'll give you guys a second, and if you're shy or you're running around and don't feel like dropping anything into the chat, that is also totally okay. I'll give you guys a few more seconds to see if you have any specific questions. I apologize, my dog is in the background. Okay, nothing specific right this second, but we'll just keep moving. So, first thing that usually starts when it comes to an on-camera interview is a reporter is going to reach out to you, right? So this is assuming that you or your organization is not the one who is reaching out and pitching, but regardless, a reporter is going to come back your way and is going to ask some questions. So first thing that you want to do is get the name and outlet of the reporter. You want to ask them what the story is, what their deadline is, what they are most interested in hearing or learning about, whether they have spoken to other individuals for interview. So that can be experts, that can be, you know, maybe other colleagues. So I know many of you, of course, are legislators yourself. So if they've spoken to another legislator, and what the best way to contact both the reporter and your own preferred method of contact. So just asking those questions as a starting point is very helpful. Next is also, though, when not to take an interview. So I know that many of the particularly Will members over the years, but legislators in general, particularly when many of you live in or are in districts that are perhaps a little bit more contentious or combative. I know some people have had experiences with reporters or members of the media who are quite difficult. This is when you want to think about when to turn down an interview request. So before we even get to the specifics of how you look on camera, how you handle it, you don't want to take on an interview if you think it's going to be a hit piece, if it's an untrustworthy reporter, an untrustworthy outlet, or even a bad angle, so that the angle at which a reporter or a media outlet is trying to come at a story just makes you a little uncomfortable. You're more than able to and welcome to turn down an interview. And in fact, I would suggest that you do that. Now, this is not to say that you should always turn down every interview for any combative outlet, but you want to think about why you are going to take on that outlet and what you would get out of it. So if it's going to reach a really important constituent audience for you and you're prepared to take that on, then I would say do it. But if not, and if it's really not going to be helpful to you or getting your message out, then I wouldn't worry about it. That being said, this is not a casual conversation. No interview is, and I know for many of you who are experienced at this, you know this, but just assume that you are being recorded or that you are on the record kind of from beginning to end in any interaction with a reporter or a member of the media, or if you're in studio or if you're on camera at all, even if they've officially stopped recording, I would just assume that you are being recorded. Okay. So when it comes to your actual messaging, and the biggest thing that you want to do is you want to connect with your audience. So when you take the interview or when you are you know, about to proverbially go on camera or go on screen, you want to think about who you're talking to. So if you're less familiar with a particular outlet, you can actually ask the reporters themselves or the producers about their audience, about who they typically serve, what kind of people are usually watching the program, and you want to connect with them. And you all, especially those of you who are actively in legislature, you have experience doing this, of connecting with your constituents, and it's the same principle. And just for a little bit of sprinkling of science, I'm not going to get too much into details because we do have limited time here today, but how the human brain works is that we connect to emotion, stories, and common ground. So bringing emotion into it, bringing stories and common ground into it. So when you talk about, look, we are all busy and worried about how we are going to get dinner on the table tonight. That's a universal experience. We are all worried about, let's say, if you're talking about something perhaps healthcare related or even budget related, we are all worried about what could happen with an unexpected health expense or caring for older parents or caring for younger kids. These are universal experiences, and lean into those when you're trying to connect with your audience about whatever topic it is you are discussing. The next is that you want to write 3 talking points. So again, an interview, particularly on camera or on TV, it's a pretty short period of time, and your ability to speak and get your point across is quite limited. We don't, as humans, especially with our attention spans these days, we don't have as much of a capacity to absorb a lot of information in that format. So you want to make sure that if you say nothing else, if no one remembers anything else from your appearance, that you get in these 3 talking points. And I think it's really important to stick to 3. It forces you to focus and really identify what you need to say, right? It really forces you to focus, and it forces you to think about, here are the things that I need to convey. So write down 3 talking points that are sticky in the brain. So things that, again, they're sticky in the brain are simple, concrete, credible, emotional stories and or metaphor. So just thinking about what phrases or sayings stay in your mind, or what are phrases or sayings that would be really familiar to your audience. So if, for example, you are in the Chicago area, there are things that you're going to say in Chicago that you're not going to say in LA or New York or in Georgia. There's even kind of aphorisms that all of us have growing up, and you kind of know which ones are common in your communities or perhaps to your audiences. Another good one to rely on sometimes is actually sports metaphors. So sports in particular are really universal in the United States. So saying, they fumbled the ball near the 5-yard line. Using those types of sayings allow people to remember what it is you're talking about and why it's important. So it might be like, all right, why would I bring up a sports metaphor when you're talking about healthcare policy or national security policy? It's because it clarifies the importance to an audience that is not an expert. All right. Okay, I don't see anything in the chat right now, but moderators, definitely please tell me if there is anything that I am missing. All right. And then, of course, in addition to your talking points that are beautifully descriptive and referencing sports and what have you, add some facts. So don't emphasize facts too much, in that you don't want to bombard someone with a bunch of statistics. We don't think like that as human beings, but you do want to have some credibility behind what you're saying. So, right, have the story, throw in the sports metaphor, and add the in a recent study from XYZ place or in a recent Pew poll, we found that 64% of our constituents believe this. This is why I think it's important. So you do want to add that in there, but don't overly rely on facts. You want to start with your story and your metaphor first. And all of these talking points, and the reason why it is important to have these 3 talking points is this is what you're going to pivot to. So there's a really amazing video of somebody who is actually a really excellent pivoter, regardless of personal opinions, and that's actually Kellyanne Conway. I'm not going to play the video for you. I do in other trainings that are much longer, but she is a particularly good example of someone who it doesn't actually matter what the interviewer has asked her, what the question is, what even the topic of the interview is. And it really frustrates her interviewers and very much did, particularly when she was all over the news. But she's very good at the pivot. So it almost doesn't matter what someone asks you. You are trying to reorient and recontrol the conversation. So some of my favorite phrases are these, but in particular, the third one. So saying something like, well, the truth is, Stan, what it comes down to is, what's important to remember is, the heart of the matter is, of course, the real question, what people are really concerned about. Let me put it another way. It allows you to take the beginning part of whatever the question might have been in the phrase, flip it around and reframe it to whatever it is that you want to reframe it to, and then getting back to those top 3 talking points. So that should, I would just keep those phrases in mind. And honestly, if you're not worried, but if you haven't done this as much in conversation, I think it's a really good conversational tool, sort of regardless, even if you're in a live Q&A type of session, even if you're in any type of meeting. To reorient and recontrol the conversation, you want to use pivot phrases. And of course, I always think of the Friends, I'm taking the couch up the stairs and yelling pivot. Sometimes you want to have that image pop up in your brain when you don't know the direction a conversation is taken. Have the pivot image pop up in your head, say a phrase, and come right back around. And this is one of the more important skills, particularly when you're in an interview process. So just remember that it is, again, not a casual conversation. You do want to connect with your audience, and you want to prepare 3 talking points. So another thing to remember is that on camera, most of your communication is body language. So particularly in Zoom pandemic world, all of us have gotten used to being on Zoom, even if we weren't as much before. And a lot of us have our self views on. So we're looking and watching ourselves and some of our own tics in a way that probably many of us were not comfortable with or had never really done before. So this probably feels a little less weird, but your nonverbal communication, particularly in a video or TV setting, is incredibly important. And it's important in real life anyway, but it is more enhanced and highlighted in a video setting. Here we go. So you want to keep it short and simple, whatever it is that you say. So speaking basically for more than 30-second sound bites. Some people say 30 to 45, some people say 25 seconds to 30 seconds. I just like to keep it a nice even 30 seconds. You should not be speaking for more than 30 seconds at a time in response to an interviewer's question. It is the interviewer's job to ask a follow-up question if they want you to speak more. They can probe you several times, but you as the person being interviewed should keep it very short and sweet, really simple, clear, direct, using non-jargony language, which again, I think many of you will have an easier time with than some of our very academic DC experts can have a time with, but keeping that time in mind and even recording yourself sometimes on, like, open up your voice memo your voice memo app on your phone and record what 30 seconds of speech sounds like. And if you replay it back to yourself, it sounds quite long. So keeping that sort of timing in mind is important. Next, on appearance, there's several things, but it kind of boils down to these 4 elements, particularly for female individuals who are on camera, which has to do with clothing, accessories, hair, and makeup. So you want to think visual and auditory, right? So again, most of your communication in this medium is certainly visual, but there's also an auditory aspect of it. So I put this picture of from The Daily Show with Trevor Noah because, right, they're faux news anchors, but because of that, their clothing also reflects what a lot of times news anchors or people on camera can and should be wearing. So you want to stay away clothing-wise from really distracting patterns. Basically, when it comes to your visual, you want to avoid distractions. So you don't want to have stuff that is necessarily like a huge, really bold, amazing, beautiful animal print. If that's your style and you would normally wear that in person, there's a way to have that subtly incorporated if you would really like to, but that should not be your main palette, because as the viewer, you want them focusing on you, what you're saying, what your message is. You want them to take you seriously. You do not want them getting distracted by a bunch of patterns, by a bunch of layers. Same thing with really big jewelry. It's both visually distracting, and if you are, whether you're frankly at home or in studio, the noise that it can actually make is also distracting, right? It can be brushing against your cheek, it can be clanking against something else. So thinking about what that means and what that looks like is really important. So you want to stick with kind of bold colors that complement your skin tone. So for women of color in particular, depending on your skin tone, there are certain colors that can wash you out in a way that it might not someone who is lighter skinned. So thinking about what colors complement you really well. Oftentimes blues go really nicely, dark purples, you know, even like some pink, some red. So kind of keeping in that color range for most people is usually a pretty good idea. For, again, accessories, you can have things that are small, but you don't want it to be so big and distracting that it just takes away from what you're saying. And the other thing is for hair and makeup. So this is, of course, more specific in general to women. But for example, right, it's not too visible right here, but when I started, right, if my hair is like this, you guys know I like you, but this is distracting, right, on a video. So you want to have hairspray. You want to make sure that either your hair is really well styled, again, because most of us are not going to be going in the studio. And for makeup, the same thing. There's all for having a natural look, is even if you're somebody who doesn't prefer to wear makeup or much makeup. But if and or whenever there is a situation in which we are going back into in person, back into in studio, those lights and that lighting really does, it'll wash you out if you don't have makeup on. It makes you look shiny. It just doesn't look good. So again, I have this additional caveat, particularly for women of color. You will have makeup artists there. Again, if you ever go in person into a studio and you've never had that experience, they'll have makeup people, they'll have hair people. I personally always suggest that you bring, and it can be the cheap secondary version if you want, right? Like the cheaper drugstore version of whatever nicer makeup, if you prefer to use nicer makeup, shade that you have. But I certainly do this. A lot of women of color, we go kind of a bit of a shade up as opposed to a shade down. And sometimes people don't know that. So don't be afraid or to say something about that or to bring your own makeup along with you, just to make sure that your tones and your color correcting and whatever else that you do or prefer to do is you're able to have. You can also just bring your own makeup along with you, but definitely put on some kind of makeup, even if it's very, very light in general. So again, you just want to think about auditory, visual, and you want to be, again, convincing to your audience. That's the most important thing, is what is your audience going to react to? What are they going to listen to? What are they going to find the most compelling? Alrighty. And on delivery, so of course we cannot all be Amanda Gorman at President Biden's inauguration, but the reason I put her picture up here is because she's an incredibly powerful example of what delivery does. So it was not just that she was reading her own powerful and beautifully written poetry. The way that she read it and her pacing and her confidence, her control, her inflection, and of course the language itself all played into making this such a beautiful thing to watch. So if you haven't watched her before, hopefully all of you have, I would highly recommend it as a really good example. But if you have, you remember that her pause, her voice going up and down, again, her confidence, but her control of when she's speaking made her a much more powerful speaker. And even if you are somebody who finds speaking like this to be intimidating or hard or difficult to do, thinking about what you sound like, what you look like, recording yourself, and oftentimes just honestly slowing down. I am a pretty fast talker, and this is still a little slowed down for me, and I'm sure that I could slow down even more in order to get my points across a lot more. So don't be afraid to slow down. Don't feel afraid to kind of think about how you're talking, and try to channel what it's like when you talk to somebody that you're comfortable with about something you're really passionate about, and your sort of natural tone and pacing usually comes out through them. So just thinking about that. And so here's what you want to remember again is brevity. So keeping it short, 30 seconds or less. Your presentation, so what you actually look like and how you're sounding. Are you coming across as somebody who is an expert in whatever way that an audience person who does not know you would take you seriously? Third, of course, is delivery. And then fourth is body language. So, we didn't get into some of the specifics of this, but things like, depending on where your camera is, so I oftentimes speak with my hands, but if I don't know where my camera is, speaking with my hands can look great and really helpful and really emphasizing. It can also be like I have one random finger popping up in the corner of the screen, and it's not actually helpful, it's more distracting. So, I can also sit like this during an interview, and I can look directly at the camera like this, since it's being recorded, or I can look down like this. Looking down for me right now feels a little more natural because we're not on Zoom, but it's in a more Zoom type environment, as opposed to an on-camera broadcast where they're just sort of cropping my head and putting me on a screen next to 4 other floating heads. So just thinking through things like that is important. And then following up. So again, I know we're moving quickly, but so you asked all those questions at the beginning of the reporter or whoever you contacted to make sure you even should take on the interview. You agreed to the interview. You did the interview with your 3 talking points, your beautiful metaphor, your short phrases. You looked great. You felt good. You had a nice quotes that you can cut and splice and share across social. So here's how you should follow up. So the interview is done. Cameras have stopped rolling. Again, still kind of assume you're on the record, so don't say something totally out of pocket. But here's how you should follow up. And now you've ended your chatter. Here's how you should follow up. So immediately you can ask or offer, if you would like, any other contacts that you can help with. So say, hey, I've actually been working with this expert or this really amazing local NGO group, or this group of educators on this subject as well. Would you like their contact information? I think they could provide some additional really cool insights about what this would mean for the community, right? For example. So you're both being helpful, and you are able to redirect an individual or a reporter to some more information that maybe you would find useful in the long run when it comes to whatever it is that you're working on. Second, you want to ask when and where they see the story running. So having a sense of when the story is going to go live, what segment it's going to be on, allows you the opportunity to, even if it's just to search it later and to snag a little transcript of it, to watch it live and, get a little recording on your phone. Because, sometimes this stuff can get lost really easily. And you want to know when it runs so that you can promote it, which is good for you if you, of course, like the interview and like the way that it ended. And it is good for the outlet and the reporter that you worked with, right? A lot of us these days have to promote our work on social media. It is a reality. You can't get away from it. So you might as well do something that's helpful for you and helpful for them and garner some more response and views for both of you. So it's mutually beneficial that way. And this last one, I think a lot of us can forget, particularly if you don't have kind of a communications person or dedicated comm support, but you want to confirm how you would like your name spelled and or what title you want to be affiliated with. So this is true for a lot of us where we have, in different situations, we have multiple affiliations. And sometimes for various reasons, it is more or less important that we are affiliated with one or another. And also if you want to have, if you have a PhD and you want to be listed as doctor, or if you're a medical doctor and we're talking about health related things, in addition to having another role, those things are important to emphasize. So, there are experts that I work with who are former ambassadors. So a lot of times they do want to emphasize that title, but there are other times where it's less important and they almost don't want to emphasize that title just for a variety of reasons. So make sure that you send that and you confirm how you want your name spelled and what title you want on there, because it's just more of a pain to fix later. You want your chirons to be nice and perfect underneath your name. So just kind of all that jazz. And then after the story runs, and this is applicable to both print and, you know, kind of an on-camera interview. Some of this stuff you might have a harder time adjusting for an on-camera interview, but I do think it's important to keep in mind, which is just say, thanks, this is great. Reporters have a hard job and don't actually get appreciated very often. I think a lot of us with thankless jobs sometimes forget that other people have thankless jobs, and it's nice to just be appreciated. So just thanks for the interview, it was a great time, goes a long way. Hey, this is great, but there's one mistake I noticed. So if you need to do a correction, hey, this is great, here's some additional information. So try to keep it positive, even if you are trying to add or fix something. Here's some stuff that might be relevant. So just start off polite and complimentary in general. Don't aggravate anyone unnecessarily, and definitely don't take it straight to a reporter's editor, right? So yeah, I have seen this happen only a few times before, but it didn't end up getting a result. Or how about this? It got a result that they wanted, but in the long run, it was not the right way to go about things. Going straight to a reporter's editor is just like someone emailing you and CCing your boss directly without having talked to you about it first, right? We all have experienced that in some way, shape, or form, and it is not a fun feeling. It feels like really disrespectful, and we've all also, at least, okay, I'll speak for myself. I've also been in a situation where, okay, maybe I wasn't handling something in the appropriate amount of time, or I wasn't able to get back at someone, or just life was happening. I had a million other things going on. Someone had tried to reach out to me. I wasn't able to get to it in a time that they felt was urgent enough. And then they followed up with the CC to my boss. That I was like, okay, that's fine. But if you start off an email first and try to CC and escalate it without you and I having hashed it out first, that would really bother me. And I think that that's very much true of reporters as well. So, you know, I would definitely just keep that in mind when you're dealing with reporters. But also, if a reporter is combative and has totally misrepresented how you have said something or how you spoke, you are more than allowed, and in fact, I encourage you to talk to them, be like, this is obviously not what I meant. This is an issue. What can we do to fix this? And if they don't seem to be interested in fixing it, it's a little bit of, okay, lesson learned. This is a no-go person for us to interact with, or this is a really big issue that we tried to correct. And some of that is going to occur in life. But that is the end of my presentation. So what I'm going to do is stop my screen share and see if any of you have any questions, or if there's anything that I can answer for all of you. I think we have 5 minutes. Hey, Sam.
Hey, Dee, that was a great presentation. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Great. Is there anything, I'm trying to think of common questions that have been asked before. I guess there is always a kind of a question about paying for makeup too. Like if you're having someone come to your house to do your makeup, maybe before a Zoom or something, and how to negotiate that. I'm not sure if you touched on that. I came right from the other session. But do you have any tips on negotiating things like that, payment in particular for makeup, etc.? That'd be really helpful.
Yeah, so that's not something that I've dealt with too much directly, personally, at least when it came to, right, because most of the stuff that I've been doing, of course, having people particularly go in studio or on camera was pre-COVID times. However, I think this is where you should just feel free to ask, right? And this can be in either email format with whatever producer you're talking to or working with, or just jump on the phone, or you can say, hey, here are the things I typically ask for, and you respond back to me and let me know if this is helpful or not. So if, for example, I was on a really big panel run by just kind of whoever, and that was like, I'm doing a keynote and, whatever. I think it's perfectly reasonable within your speaker's agreement or contract to ask, here's, you know, how I've done this before, here's what I anticipate it would cost, would you cover hair and makeup for me as part of this speaker's agreement? And look, the worst that people are going to say is no. And then you can also take it from there, which is that, okay, I appreciate that, but this is actually a pretty standard thing for me. This is going to be recorded. I think that this is big enough to require it. You know, I think feel comfortable to push back. But if that's a desire for you and that's something that you would like to have, I think totally ask. The other thing is particularly nowadays with all of us in digital format, a lot of organizations are saving money on not having to host in-person events, and you're not having to spend, you know, thousands and thousands of dollars on in-person event space, on in-person catering, on physical printing of materials. So, you know, there might be also more wiggle room in the budget now for asking for things like that, whereas maybe for an in-person event, it'd be like, you know, our budget's a little tight, this could be a little bit more tricky. So I would just say go ahead and ask. There's no harm in asking.
You never know.
Exactly.
Which kind of brings me to another question about going into like starting to go into studios again, as you know, fingers crossed, COVID winds down. Maybe is there anything you can speak to about studios' COVID vaccine policies? Right, you're not going to be on screen wearing a mask. That might be something to start looking into.
I think so. I think that, you know, again, straight up asking that question. So here's my general sort of rule of particularly the producer. So the person who's your booker, who's your producer, basically the person you're talking to and dealing with when you are setting up the interview. So for in-person studio, or send you a car. If they want you there physically, always get the car. One, it's great. Two, it also allows the studio to keep an eye on, you know, are you close? It doesn't leave as much stuff up to chance for them. So it's actually helpful for them. So ask the questions though about, is there a car service provided? Is there hair and makeup provided? And now I think adding in the COVID question of, hey, I'm in a workplace, or, you know, I am vaccinated. What is your vaccination policy? Because I would like to know prior to me physically coming into the studio. And you don't need to give any more explanation than that, quite frankly, if you want to, and say, look, for whatever reason, I am immunocompromised, or I'm around young children, or whatever. But I think just straight up asking that is perfectly acceptable. And I think just going ahead and doing that, to be like, I would not be comfortable coming into the studio if you do not have a mandatory vaccination policy.
Most of the large studios now do. Definitely something to ask and be aware of, because who knows, it's the world we live in now. It's kind of crazy.
Exactly. And also you can ask them in, you know, if you're really concerned, or if it's a smaller outlet, or you kind of know that the area you're in is weird, you can ask someone to provide a written statement, right? Like just something even basic, but just say, I would need in writing that all of your cast and crew and anyone that I'm going to run across is going to be vaccinated, and like ask for that, some kind of an assurance that way. That way, if like, God forbid, for some reason, someone went rogue or something kind of nuts happens, or you get sick, you at least have some backup documentation that someone agreed and said, everyone here is vaccinated. And that just at least gives you some more leverage or leeway if you need to have a follow-up conversation later on.
That's a really good point. Always get everything in writing, but
get it in writing. So keep it to email for sure, because that way you at least have some kind of a documented pathway.
Totally. And I guess to kind of close out, is there any common mistakes or things people overlook, or I guess any like just closing thoughts, I guess, that you want to leave with people about what to do or what not to do that you didn't touch on in your presentation?
Yeah, I think that, you know, there's a reason public speaking is one of the top collective fears that people have in general. And speaking on camera is nerve-wracking in a really different way. It can be just super scary for people. So if you ever find yourself in a situation where you start getting nervous, or you start getting flustered, or you can't stop talking, just breathe and pause and start all over again. You never did as badly as you think you do. We're all way more critical of ourselves. And take the time if you can to record yourself for a few minutes, audio record yourself if you only have a minute, ask a friend to watch a video with you, see what they notice about tics that you have or how your eyeballs are moving around. And just take a deep breath, smile, you'll be fine. But it can be really intimidating, and that's just part of it. It kind of sucks.
And constructive feedback, super important. But I think that's it for today. I don't see any questions, but I just want to say thank you so much, G. It's always a pleasure to have you with us and to learn from you. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I had a great time, and hopefully this was useful. So
Thank you, and have
great.
a good rest of your day.
Thanks, you too. Bye.